You might think a world war would start with bombs dropping and armies marching, but what if it begins quietly? Perhaps a massive cyber attack, disrupting communication, creating confusion, and leaving the world unsure of what's real. Then, out of nowhere, Russia launches a direct attack on NATO, something no one saw coming. The world will hold on its breath, unsure of the next move. Would the US honor its commitments to NATO, or would it make a move that leaves everyone questioning their next steps? The situation spirals, and suddenly, nuclear war is no longer a distant threat. So, what if Russia did attack NATO? What would happen next? The moment a NATO country is attacked, Article 5 is immediately triggered. An attack on one member is treated as an attack on all. This principle of collective defense is the cornerstone of NATO's unity and military strategy. In the face of a direct threat, the alliance springs into action. Emergency meetings are convened within hours, bringing together leaders from member states to coordinate a unified response. NATO's initial actions would be measured and strategic, designed to neutralize the threat without escalating the conflict uncontrollably. One likely move would be precision strikes on Russian military supply lines. NATO could use precise weapons like JDAMs, launched from fighter jets, to hit Russian supply lines with near-perfect accuracy. Stealth jets like the F-35 would make these strikes hard to detect, keeping NATO in control. By targeting key logistics hubs and transport routes, NATO could cripple Russia's ability to sustain its forces and project power. These strikes would be meticulously planned to minimize civilian casualties, while maximizing strategic impact. Another potential tactic would be imposing naval blockades in the Black and Baltic Seas. These waterways are critical for Russia's military and economic activities. By cutting off access, NATO could disrupt Russia's supply chains and naval operations. NATO could quickly establish control over these seas, effectively isolating Russia and demonstrating the alliance's resolve to protect its borders. Russia would likely hit NATO's military assets with precision missiles like the Iskander and Kaliber, targeting airfields and command centers. Its S-400 and S-500 systems would counter NATO's air power, while ground forces could mobilize along NATO's eastern border, launching incursions and artillery strikes to disrupt supply lines. Not to mention, NATO would also have to counter Russia's cyber capabilities. Russia has a history of using cyber attacks to destabilize adversaries, targeting everything from infrastructure to elections. NATO's robust cybersecurity framework would be deployed to neutralize these threats. This would level the playing field in the cyber domain, a critical arena in modern warfare. However, NATO's response would have to walk a fine line. Acting too weakly could undermine the alliance's credibility. Conversely, an overly aggressive response risks escalating the conflict beyond control, potentially drawing in other global powers and sparking a wider war. Striking the right balance between deterrence and escalation would be crucial, with every decision carrying profound consequences. Now, let's address a key question. How would the United States respond in such a crisis? Would it side with Russia or stand with NATO? The answer is clear. There is no scenario in which the US would align with Russia. As NATO's most powerful member, the US would take a leading role in the alliance's counteroffensive. Though President Donald Trump criticized NATO's defense spending, urging European countries to contribute more, believing the US should not shoulder the financial burden alone. NATO's commitment to collective defense remains strong. Despite concerns from some political leaders, the US would still lead the charge to ensure NATO's strength. The US military response would include the rapid deployment of nuclear-capable bombers to Europe, primarily the B-52 Stratofortress and B-2 Spirit. These bombers serve as a strategic deterrent, sending a clear message to Russia that they are prepared to escalate to the highest level of force if necessary. Alongside this, the US, which has 45,000 troops in Europe alone, would reinforce NATO's eastern flank, sending troops and advanced equipment to Poland and the Baltic states. This would not only bolster NATO's defenses, but also signal to Russia that the US is fully committed to protecting its allies. The US would also deploy cutting-edge air defense systems, such as the Patriot missile system, to counter Russian missile threats. They can integrate other systems, such as the Aegis ballistic missile defense system, currently deployed on US Navy destroyers. The Aegis system, capable of tracking over 100 targets simultaneously, would provide layered protection against Russia's missile strikes. By neutralizing Russia's missile capabilities, the US would ensure that NATO maintains a strong defensive posture. The message to Russia would be unmistakable. Any aggression against NATO would trigger a unified and overwhelming response, with the US at the forefront. This display of strength would leave no doubt in Moscow's mind about the consequences of challenging the alliance. As the conflict between NATO and Russia escalates, Russia faces the harsh reality that winning a conventional war against NATO is nearly impossible. With NATO's overwhelming military and technological edge, Russia might turn to tactical nuclear weapons to shift the balance. These weapons, with yields of 1 to 100 kilotons, are designed for battlefield use, targeting military units or infrastructure, rather than wiping out cities. This approach could give Russia leverage without risking full-scale nuclear war or destroying its own territory. One potential target for a Russian tactical nuke could be Ukraine, already ravaged by conflict. A nuclear strike there would test NATO's resolve, sending a clear message that Russia is willing to escalate. The world would watch to see if NATO stands firm or seeks negotiations to avoid further escalation. Such a move could also fracture NATO's unity, as member states debate how far to go in response. Alternatively, Russia might threaten NATO soil directly. With around 6,375 nuclear warheads, Russia could use tactical or strategic nukes to pressure NATO into negotiations. Targeting a NATO member with a low-yield weapon might avoid triggering global nuclear war, but the consequences would still be devastating. Russia has a very powerful nuclear arsenal. One of its key weapons is the RS-28 Sarmat, a huge missile that can carry up to 10 nuclear warheads and reach any target over vast distances. It also has precise missiles like the Yars and Topol-M, which are hard to stop and help scare off enemies. Additionally, Russia's Borei-class submarines can launch nuclear missiles from underwater, making sure Russia can strike back even if attacked. Together, these weapons make Russia's nuclear forces formidable. NATO's response to any nuclear threat would be immediate and severe, triggering the Article 5 further, leading to retaliatory strikes, both conventional and nuclear, against Russian military targets. NATO's missile defense systems would attempt to intercept incoming nukes, while counterforce strategies would aim to cripple Russia's nuclear command and control. The stakes are enormous. A Russian nuclear strike could isolate the country further, triggering economic collapse and unprecedented retaliation. The biggest risk for Putin is whether NATO, led by the US, would see a nuclear attack as a red line, risking a full-scale nuclear exchange. Given NATO's deterrence capabilities and Russia's massive arsenal, the situation could spiral far beyond what the Kremlin anticipates. As the conflict grows, other global powers might seize the chance to advance their own interests. China, for example, could exploit NATO's focus on Russia to move on Taiwan. With its modernized military and growing naval power, China might see this as an opportunity to act. The US has pledged to defend Taiwan, which could drag the Pacific into the conflict, expanding it globally. Countries like Iran and North Korea could also support Russia. Iran, a longtime Russian partner, might send weapons or advisors, while North Korea could supply missiles, artillery, or even troops. Both nations, hostile to the West, could see the conflict as a chance to challenge US dominance, potentially widening the war. Meanwhile, nations like India and those in the Middle East could face tough choices. India, with close ties to Russia, might hesitate to take sides, but could eventually be forced to. Middle Eastern countries, tied to both Russia and the US, might struggle to remain neutral as trade routes and energy supplies are disrupted. If the conflict escalates into a world war, it could become the largest global confrontation since World War II. Alliances would shift, economies would collapse, and the geopolitical landscape would be forever altered. The fallout would reshape international relations for generations. This conflict could end in one of three ways, each carrying catastrophic consequences. A NATO victory would push Russia's military and economy to the brink. Severe sanctions and battlefield losses could cripple Russia's ability to fight, potentially sparking internal instability and regime change. But the cost would be staggering. Millions displaced, European cities in ruins, and NATO forces stretched thin in a prolonged occupation or containment effort. Even with Russia defeated, the geopolitical fallout would reshape the world for decades. A stalemate is equally perilous. Without a decisive victory, the war could drag on for years, morphing into cyber warfare, economic sabotage, and endless proxy battles. Global supply chains would collapse, triggering recessions, while energy shortages would send prices skyrocketing. Europe would remain on constant alert, with NATO fortifying borders as Russia regroups. A Cold War-style standoff could become the new normal, marked by endless skirmishes and no clear resolution. Finally, the worst-case scenario, a nuclear catastrophe, hangs over every decision. If Russia, facing defeat, resorts to tactical nuclear weapons, NATO's response would be swift and devastating. Even a single strike could ignite an uncontrollable chain reaction, turning Europe into a nuclear wasteland. A full-scale exchange between Russia and the US would mean global annihilation, leaving no victors, only survivors in a shattered world. One thing is certain, if this war begins, the world as we know it will never be the same. So, what do you think? How should NATO respond if Russia attacked? It's a tough hypothetical with high stakes. The greater good must come first when facing such extreme scenarios. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions on global events.